Lyra Vale was still wet from the king's bath when the doors crashed open. Steam curled around her bare shoulders. Moonlight cut across black marble. Water trembled at her knees. She had slipped into the forbidden chamber to hide from a murder she should never have witnessed, and now the most dangerous alpha in the north stood in the doorway staring at her, as if fate had broken into his rooms wearing her face. The Alpha King stepped inside. He did not shout. He did not need to. His presence crushed the chamber into silence. Tall, dressed in black leather edged with silver, he looked less like a ruler than a sentence already passed. His guards stayed at his back for one breath, then lowered their eyes when his gaze fixed on the cracked moonstone hanging at Lyra's throat. Everything in him went still. Lyra's hand flew to the pendant. "I didn't know this was your chamber." "You crossed 3 locked corridors," he said, voice low and cold. "You entered the only room in this palace forbidden to everyone." His eyes burned on the stone. "And you wear that." Fear turned sharper. "I was hiding. From whom?" She swallowed. Lady Sarai's blood-stained dress flashed through her mind. The servant choking on the corridor floor, the knife, the smile. "I saw something I shouldn't have." He took one step closer. Water shivered around her legs. "Who are you?" "Lyra Vale," one of the guards inhaled softly. The king noticed. He noticed everything. "Leave us," he said. The guards froze, then obeyed. The door shut with a boom that sealed her alone with him. He came to the edge of the pool and crouched, impossibly controlled, brutally attentive. Up close, he was worse. A scar through one brow, a mouth too precise to be kind, eyes like gold struck through with winter. His scent reached her. Cedar smoke, iron, power held on a knife's edge. "Give me the pendant." "No." His eyes flashed. "It was my mother's," she said, voice shaking but stubborn. "It is mine. Do you know what it is?" "Or moonstone." "That," he said softly, "is the dead queen's moonstone." The words hit so hard Lyra forgot to breathe. Impossible. He reached for the chain. She jerked back. Her heels slipped. She crashed against the pool's slick edge with a cry, and his hand closed around her wrist. Heat exploded through her. Her wolf, half-starved and silent for years, woke with a violent rush. The chamber spun silver. His grip burned. His breath caught. Gold flooded his eyes as if something old and savage had recognized her before his mind could refuse it. He yanked her out of the water. Lyra hit his chest. Soaked silk clinging to her skin, fingers splayed against hard muscle and leather. His heartbeat pounded under her palm. His hand slid to the back of her neck. His voice dropped below language, sharpened by wolf and hunger and command. "Mine." "No." She shoved at him, horror and heat colliding under her skin. The doors burst open at the sound of her cry. Guards rushed in, stopped dead, then one by one dropped to their knees as they saw her in his arms, the moonstone shining at her throat, his eyes burning with a claim not yet completed but already terrifying. "The moon heir," the oldest guard breathed. Lyra went cold. The king tightened his hold and did not look away from her. "Seal the chamber," he ordered. "Summon the High Oracle. Call the council." His thumb pressed once against the wild pulse in her throat. "The girl has been found." His gaze burned into hers. "My queen has returned." Chapter 1. By sunrise, the palace had decided Lyra was either a miracle or a reason to kill. She sat in a guarded room wrapped in the king's black robe, too expensive, too soft, smelling of pine smoke and male power. 4 guards stood inside. More waited outside. 2 maids hovered at the walls like frightened ghosts. On the table before her lay untouched food and a silver cup of tea she had not trusted enough to drink. Her body had stopped shaking. Her mind had not. The chamber doors opened. The Alpha King entered as if the room belonged to his will, not stone. It probably did. He looked infuriatingly composed in dark court clothes, as if he had not pulled a half-naked stranger from his forbidden bath and called her his queen before half the palace. The servants vanished at a single glance from him. He looked at the untouched tray. You have not eaten. I'm not in the habit of dining in cages. His gaze sharpened. Someone tried to kill you last night. Lady Sarai stabbed a servant in front of me. Something dark moved behind his face. So you did see. You believe me? I smelled her blood on you. He came closer. And fear. That answer landed harder than it should have. She had spent most of her life being disbelieved quickly and ignored even faster. Being believed by him felt dangerous in a different way. You called me your queen, she said. Explain. He stood in silence long enough to make her pulse jump. My mother died 19 years ago. That is what the kingdom believes. The truth is she gave birth that night. A daughter vanished before dawn. The only thing left behind was the queen's moonstone. Lyra's fingers closed reflexively over the pendant. No, your mother's name, Mira. He went still. She served the queen. Lyra stared. You remember her? I remember everyone who disappeared the night my parents died. The room seemed to tighten around her. Mira's warning suddenly sounded less like grief and more like strategy. Run if they ever find you. Never take off the pendant. Stay small. Stay silent. This could be a lie, Lyra said. Yes. The simple honesty knocked the breath from her. He stepped closer, which is why I intend to drag the truth out of every person who touched it. And until then, you stay under my protection. That sounds like a prison. It is survival. It is still a cage. His eyes moved over her face, the robe swallowing her frame, the moonstone at her throat. For now, he said, it is both. She hated that because it was true. When he turned to leave, panic sharpened into anger. What if I refuse? He looked back over his shoulder. The gold in his eyes burned low and dangerous. Then I drag you back myself. The words hit like a hand at her neck. He left her with the scent of smoke and cold fire, and the unbearable realization that somehow the man frightening her most had already become the only thing in the palace that felt solid. The first attempt on her life came before noon. A new maid brought tea, too sweet, Belvine. Lyra knew the scent from old healing rooms. She smiled faintly and said, "Pour yourself a second cup." The woman froze. That was enough. Lyra knocked the tray aside. Porcelain shattered. The maid hissed, pulled a knife from her sleeve, and lunged. Lyra seized the fruit knife from the table and barely caught the first strike. The second sliced her forearm. The third would have gone into her ribs. The doors exploded open. The king moved faster than sight. 1 second the blade hovered over Lyra. The next, the assassin was in the air, his hand around her throat, slamming her into the wall hard enough to crack stone. "Who sent you?" She spat blood and smiled, then bit down on poison. Her body convulsed once and fell still. Lyra stared at the corpse, at the smoking tea, at the proof that whoever wanted her dead planned elegantly. The room emptied under the king's orders until only he and Lyra remained. He knelt before her to inspect the cut on her arm. His hands were warm, steady, devastatingly careful. She should have pulled away. She didn't. "You should have had tasters," she said. "You should have had 12 guards. I had 4. You should have had 12. He washed the blood from her skin himself. The contrast of those lethal hands binding her arm made something strange tighten low in her chest. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Because someone spilled your blood inside my rooms. That sounds like offended pride. Both." She should not have smiled. His gaze flicked to her mouth. The air changed at once. Her blood scented the room. His pupils widened. Gold deepened in his eyes. She tried to take her hand back. He held on. "Do not call me your majesty right now," he said, voice rougher than before. She looked up too quickly. "Then what should I call you?" "Nothing." He finished the bandage and rose, already rebuilding control, which only made him worse. Then he told her Sarai had likely ordered the attack. Then he told her she was moving into his private wing. Then he told her it was not a request. She stood so fast the chair scraped. "Absolutely not." "Someone poisoned tea meant for your mouth. You are not leaving my sight again. You don't get to decide that." "Watch me." She hated that her pulse jumped at the command. Still, when he offered his hand, she took it. The bond flared the instant their skin touched. Hot, alive, unfinished. The corridor beyond fell silent as they stepped out together, hand in hand, and every servant and noble turned to stare. At the far end of the hall, Lady Sarai stood dressed in white, beautiful as wrought. Her eyes fell to their joined hands. The smile vanished. She curtsied to the king and said sweetly, "How touching. Have you decided whether to crown her or bury her?" The king didn't stop walking. "Try her again," he said softly, "and I will feed what remains of you to my wolves." For the first time in Lyra's life, someone had threatened a noble on her behalf. The fact that it made her feel safer instead of more afraid should have terrified her. It did. Chapter 2. The king's private wing felt like the inside of a drawn blade. Dark stone, silver wards, reinforced doors, nothing decorative that did not also look useful in war. He put Lyra in a room across from his own. She looked around at the books, the carved moonwood bed, the fire already lit in the hearth, and turned to him. "This is absurd. It is secure. It looks like a queen's room. It is for protected members of the royal house." The words struck too deep. He told her she would attend dinner with him that night so the council could see her and fear the wrong thing. She told him he was insufferable. He almost laughed. It made him briefly, unfairly devastating. Then she asked the question they had both been avoiding. "The bond," she said. "What was that?" He shut the door behind him. The room shrank instantly. "There is a difference between chosen mates and fated ones," he said. "Chosen bonds serve politics. Fate serves nothing convenient." Her pulse started climbing. "When I touched you," he said, gaze fixed on her, "my wolf recognized yours. That's impossible. You think I'm your sister?" "No." The certainty in the words stopped her. "If you were blood of my blood, the bond would have died before it formed." Relief hit so hard it made her dizzy. Then came the next terror. "Then what am I?" He looked at the moonstone, the answer threatening to split the kingdom open. Before she could press harder, a guard arrived with news. The servant Sarai stabbed had survived long enough to speak. He had named Mira as the sender of a letter written 7 months after the queen's death. Lyra went cold. "My mother?" The king's face turned to stone. "The letter is missing. Someone had killed for it. Someone was still killing. He told her to stay in her room." She waited exactly long enough to resent him properly, then climbed out the window. Chapter 3. She found the infirmary in chaos. The high oracle stood outside, speaking in low, urgent tones with the king. Lyra caught only fragments, old blood, hidden lines, danger awakening with her return. Then the servant cried out from inside, and Lyra slipped through a side entrance before anyone could stop her. The dying man stared at her as if he had been waiting years. "Mira's girl," he rasped. Lyra rushed to the bedside. "You knew my mother? What letter? What did Sarai want?" "Proof," he wheezed, "of whose child you are." The room went silent. "She was not nurse only," he whispered. "Mira served the queen's shadow circle." The oracle answered Lyra's shocked stare. "The queen's private network. Spies, oath-keepers, blood loyalists." The servant coughed blood. The queen gave the babe to Mira the night of the coup, ordered her to run, his eyes fixed on the pendant. The child had the moon mark. Lyra's hand flew to the faint crescent-shaped mark below her collarbone. The king saw. Everything in him sharpened. Mira wrote later. The servant gasped. "The child lives. She will return her when the danger passes." Tears slid from the old man's eyes. Danger never passed. "Who intercepted the letters?" the king demanded. The man's eyes filled with terror. "Inside the court, close, closer than—" The window shattered. An arrow punched through the room and buried itself in the servant's throat. The king moved before the glass hit the floor. He seized Lyra and drove her down as a second arrow struck the wall where her head had been. Then he rose, shifted, and the room exploded into nightmare. His wolf was enormous. Black, monstrous, beautiful in the way storms were beautiful if you enjoyed being reminded how fragile you were. He launched through the broken window. Lyra staggered up to the ledge in time to see him land in the courtyard below and tear an assassin's throat open with savage precision. No hesitation, no mercy, just lethal, controlled violence wrapped in black fur and royal authority. Another assassin fled. The king's wolf cut him down too. When he shifted back, blood streaked his chest. The courtyard bowed around him. Then Sarai appeared on the cloister steps in white silk and poison. The king turned toward her with murder still on his skin. "Arrest her," he said. Sarai did not go quietly. She killed one guard, slashed another, and ran straight for Lyra. The fight in the upper infirmary corridor lasted seconds. Sarai slammed Lyra into a wall, sword to her throat, breath hot with hatred. "You should have died in the chamber." Then the king entered. He saw the blade at Lyra's neck and went terrifyingly still. "Release her. You'll kill me," Sarai said. "Yes." The honesty of it drained the color from her face. She pressed the blade harder. Blood stung Lyra's skin. "Then I take her with me." He did something then, something deeper than command. A pressure of dominance so sharp Sarai's wolf recoiled. That single hesitation was enough. Lyra drove her heel down on Sarai's knee. Bone cracked. Sarai screamed. The king crossed the room in a blur, caught her wrist, pinned her to the wall. "Who else?" he asked. She laughed through blood. "Ask your uncle." The room died around the words. Then she bit down on poison and died smiling. The king caught Lyra's face between his hands the moment Sarai dropped, searching the line at her throat, as if fury alone could heal it. His thumbs trembled once, barely. It was enough to shake her more than the blade had. He ordered the eastern gates sealed. He ordered the council to the war chamber. Then he took Lyra with him. He did not leave her behind again. Chapter 4. The war chamber had no windows, only a silver map of the kingdom carved into the floor, and a council full of wolves looking at Lyra like she was a crown someone hadn't decided whether to polish or bury. The king seated her at his right. The chancellor objected. The king told him to get used to it. The oracle gave the evidence, the moonstone, the mark, Mira's oath, the hidden letters. Lord Baron sneered that royal blood did not make a servant-born girl fit to rule. Lyra told him bold men should be more careful when their allies had spent the day poisoning tea and shooting witnesses. The king did not smile, but pride flashed hot and dangerous in his eyes. Then the oracle called Lyra into the center of the silver map and told her to remove the pendant. Lyra nearly refused. The old woman promised not to take it, only test it. She pressed 2 fingers to the moonstone and began to chant. Silver fire raced through the floor. The room darkened. The map was light circled Lyra's feet, then split and whipped across the chamber toward the king. Kyle rose abruptly as silver coiled around his wrist. When the light died, the oracle looked pale. "Recognition," she said hoarsely, "of the queen's blood." Silence cracked. Then she turned toward the king. "And of a royal mating bond." The room erupted. The king threw everyone out. When the door shut, Lyra stood in the silver-lit silence staring at him. "Tell me I heard that wrong." "You did not." "The moonstone recognized me." "Yes." "And you—" His jaw tightened. "Yes." She laughed once, brittle and furious. "So I may be some hidden royal disaster, and on top of that I'm tied to you?" He came around the table. She backed up before she could stop herself. Hurt flickered across his face so fast she almost missed it. "I'm not going to force this." That should have relieved her. Instead, it made him harder to resist. "What happens now?" she asked. He stopped close enough to make the air feel smaller. "You want to know what happens between us. I want to know what danger I'm standing in. Both. Always that brutal honesty." He lifted a hand, paused by her cheek, and waited. She nodded. His fingertips brushed her skin. Fire rippled through the unfinished bond. "You are in danger," he said quietly. "From the court, from my uncle, from every pack that will try to use you, and from me if you mistake control for indifference." Her heartbeat stumbled. "What does that mean?" His eyes locked onto hers. "It means every instinct I have is telling me to lock this chamber, put my scent on your skin, and make the kingdom understand you are beyond their reach." Heat flooded her so fast it hurt. "But I won't," he said, voice raw now. "Unless you ask." The room went tight with everything neither of them touched. Then the doors crashed open. A bloodied messenger fell to one knee. "Majesty, the Eastern Regent's banners have risen." His face was ash white. "And the lower city is burning." Lyra's home was on fire. The king gave orders instantly. Lyra said, "I'm going." He said no. She said the people below would listen to her before they listened to a king's banners. He argued. She argued harder. Finally he looked at the smoke climbing over the city and gave in with visible violence. Before she left, he unclasped a black leather bracelet from his wrist, braided around a silver fang, and pressed it into her hand. "My scent marker," he said. The words shivered through her. "If you are cornered, tear it." His fingers closed over hers. "And Lyra?" She looked up. "Come back to me." The sentence hit harder than any command. Then he let her go. Chapter 5. The lower city smelled like smoke, wet ash, and fear. Lyra moved through it with Captain Mara and the king's guard stripped of royal colours. She climbed a broken fountain in the market square and shouted until frightened faces turned toward her. "I grew up in these streets." That got their attention. "They burned your storehouses first because hungry people panic faster," she cried. "They want you blind and desperate while they spread lies about curses and hidden blood." She held up the moonstone and the king's scent marker. "The Alpha King has opened the northern cisterns and sent healers down. 3 routes are still open. Move by family lines. Help your own. And if anyone tells you the palace abandoned you, look at the wolves standing here." The crowd shifted. Fear became movement. Buckets formed. Children were carried. Old women shouted orders like generals. Panic narrowed into purpose. For the first time all day, Lyra felt useful instead of hunting. Then a scream tore from the river ward. She ran. In the square beyond the moonhouse, 4 Eastern soldiers had a family pinned against the wall. A boy cried with a blade at his throat. A woman was dragged by the hair. The father bled in the dirt. A cloaked female figure dropped from the shadows and killed 2 of the men before anyone else reached them. The third died under Mara's sword. The 4th still held the boy. The woman in black stilled. Then she threw back her hood. Lyra's world stopped. Miravail should have been ashes. Instead, her dead mother stood in the burning alley with blood on her blades and years of lies in her eyes. "Moonchild," she said. Lyra hit her hard enough to force a step back. "You died." Mira held her anyway. "I had to. You let me bury an empty pyre." Pain flashed across Mira's face, but urgency strangled apology. "Your king is walking into a trap." Everything in Lyra froze. Mira told them the Eastern Regent had rigged the North Courtyard with silver charges. She spoke like someone who knew the plan, because she had once lived inside the world that made plans like it. "You don't get to say that and walk away," Lyra snapped. "Then listen fast." Mira caught the moonstone. "The Queen gave you to me the night you were born." She knew the coup had begun. Her voice roughened. "You were never the old king's child." The ground went out from under Lyra. "She conceived you with the Northern War Prince before the marriage line was sealed," Mira said. "When the old king learned there might be an heir carrying stronger blood than his own, he meant to kill you at birth." Lyra stared at her. Not sister, never sister. The bond hadn't been wrong. It had been terrifyingly right. "You and the Alpha King share no blood," Mira said. "That is why the old factions feared you. If you lived and one day bound to him, the throne and the Queen's hidden line would join." Lyra felt sick. Then the first explosion hit the palace walls. No more time. Chapter 6. The North Courtyard was already in chaos when Lyra reached it. The first silver charge had blown open the old chain-well line. Wolves shouted. Stone rained down. The second blast erupted just as Kyle looked up at the sound of her scream. "Kyle!" The ground collapsed beneath him. He vanished into smoke. Lyra ran straight for the crater. She slid down broken stone into the half-collapsed well chamber below and found him pinned beneath a slab. One leg trapped, blood soaking his side. Silver ore burned through the cracked walls around him, poison to wolves. He looked up at her through pain and said the most infuriating thing possible. "You disobeyed me again." She almost laughed from sheer relief. "Lecture me after we survive." The slab wouldn't move. Silver flared hotter where his skin touched it. His wolf was raging under the surface, trapped between pain and fury. "Go," he bit out. "Before the chamber falls." "No." Lyra. She grabbed his face with both hands because if she didn't, she might break apart. "Do not mistake obedience for the only kind of loyalty I know how to give." The bond flared violently between them. His eyes changed. "What did you hear?" he asked. "About what? About us?" The chamber groaned above them. Stone shifted, death pressed close. There was no room left for cowardice. "I heard enough to know we are not blood," she whispered, "and enough to know every time you touched me. I wanted more than fear should allow." Something savage and raw cracked open in his face. She pressed the moonstone against the silver-veined slab. White light burst through the chamber. The silver poison recoiled. Together they heaved until the slab shifted, then moved, then broke enough for him to wrench free. The moment he was upright, his hand closed around the back of her neck and he kissed her. It was brutal, relieved, starving, smoke and blood and shock, and the edge of obsession. Her wolf surged toward him. His mouth claimed one fierce second that left her shaking. Then he tore himself away. "Later," he said against her lips. The promise wrecked her. He dragged her out, just as the chamber collapsed behind them. They emerged into a courtyard of blood and battle, and the Eastern Regent rode through the smoke beneath a dark banner. He looked at Lyra and smiled with immediate hatred. So the bastard lived. Kyle moved in front of her instantly. The Regent laughed. "Do you still not see what she is? Ask your oracle what the old Queen's line used to do. Bonds can be guided, triggered, forced. The girl was raised to bind the throne." The words hit like poison. Lyra felt Kyle go cold beside her. The Regent drew his blade. "Kill the girl." Archers rose on the wall. They loosed. Kyle stepped in front of her and took an arrow in the shoulder. Rage exploded through Lyra. The moonstone blazed in her fist. The old silver beneath the courtyard woke and surged around the Eastern soldiers, trapping them in burning rings of ward light, while the king's wolves stood untouched beyond them. The Regent saw her power and finally looked afraid. "Good," he charged. Lyra stepped into him instead of away. She drove the moonstone into the gap beneath his raised arm. Silver fire answered. He screamed. Kyle hit him a heartbeat later and drove him to his knees. "You hunted a child for 18 years, the king said. I protected the throne," the Regent spat. "You protected your hand on its throat." Before the king could decide whether to kill him, Mira crossed the courtyard and opened the Regent's throat herself. "For the Queen," she said. The remaining Eastern soldiers dropped their weapons. Victory should have felt clean. It didn't. It felt like smoke and blood and all the lies that had built the day. Lyra swayed. Kyle caught her. She clutched his torn leathers and let herself lean for one breathing second because the world had finally stopped trying to kill her long enough to allow. He held her like a man who had imagined losing her once and refused a second chance. Chapter 7. That night, the palace reeked of smoke and healing herbs. The lower city still stood. Sarai was dead. The Regent was dead. Mira was alive and under guard. The council had turned from suspicious to reverent with such speed it made Lyra want to laugh and spit at the same time. Instead, she sat by the window in the room across from Kyle's and stared at the dark city lights until he knocked once and entered. He looked tired for the first time. Fresh clothes over hidden bandages, damp hair, exhaustion banked under control. He shut the door behind him and stood there like the room itself had become dangerous. "You saved my life," he said. "You saved mine first. That was not a contest. It is becoming one." A shadow of amusement touched him and vanished. Silence thickened between them. He told her the Regent had lied about many things, but not this. The old Queen's line had once used rites to test, and even push bonds. Yet the bond between them had answered before anyone knew enough to manipulate it. "Whatever this is," he said, "it is ours, not theirs. Ours." She felt the words settle deep. "And if I don't know what to do with it yet, then you do nothing. Until you do." The restraint in that answer undid her worse than force would have. She told him she had spent half her life hidden and the other half overlooked. She told him she didn't know how to become whatever the court wanted from her. "Then don't," he said. "Become whoever you choose. Let them adjust." Her throat tightened. He came closer, slowly, leaving her room to retreat. She didn't. When his fingers touched her cheek, she leaned into them. His eyes darkened instantly. "Lyra." There was a question in her name. She answered by reaching for him first. He kissed her like a man starving carefully. Nothing reckless this time. Nothing torn open by collapse and blood and almost lost. Just devastating restraint. Patient hunger. One hand on her face, the other at her waist. Every inch of him held tight for her sake. The bond warmed under her skin. Her fingers clenched in his shirt. When he broke the kiss, his forehead stayed against hers. "If I keep going," he said roughly, "I will forget every promise I made about patience." "That sounds like your problem." A dark, broken sound escaped him. He kissed her again, brief, fierce, enough to make everything inside her ache. Then a knock shattered the moment. Celine entered looking more rattled than the day's war had managed. "Majesty," she said, "we have a problem." Kyle turned, already cold again. "What now?" Celine's gaze flicked to Lyra. A rider came from the western coast carrying a sealed cipher only the late Queen used in wartime. Silence struck. Kyle's face emptied into something far more dangerous than anger. Celine swallowed once. "The code is genuine." She handed him the message. He read. His control cracked by a breath. Hope flashed once across his face, so painful and unwanted it felt private to witness. Then he folded the letter. "It's her hand," he said. Lyra's pulse stumbled. Celine spoke carefully. "The message claims the Queen escaped the massacre, was taken west, and stayed hidden because everyone near the throne had been compromised. She requests a meeting at Blackwater Abbey in 3 days. And she asks," Celine added, quieter now, "for the moonstone bearer to be brought to her." "No," Kyle said instantly. Lyra looked at him. "What if I choose to go?" "No." She stepped toward him. "You don't get to decide before I finish thinking." He came just as close, eyes burning. "If I lose you now, after finally finding you, I will tear this kingdom apart with my teeth." The confession hit with no polish, no royal distance, no mercy. Fear. His, real and unhidden. Her anger faltered under the weight of it. Celine, wisely, said she would prepare scouts and left them alone again. The door shut. Lyra crossed to him slowly. "You're angry with her," she said. "I don't know what I am," he answered. "I spent 19 years speaking to a grave." The pain inside the sentence was so old it barely sounded human. She took his hand. "My mother lied to me too," she said softly. "Whatever the dead, or the not dead, think they did for love, they do not get easy forgiveness." His gaze shifted to her, dark and exhausted and too honest. "No," he said. "They don't." He lifted her knuckles to his mouth and kissed them once. "At dawn, you speak to Mira," he said. "After that, we decide about the coast together. Together." The word steadied something in her. He touched her cheek one last time and left before either of them could break the fragile control holding the night together. Lyra stood alone at the window with the moonstone at her throat, and smoke still fading over the city. Yesterday she had been a servant girl hiding from a noblewoman's knife. Today she carried a queen's blood, an Alpha King's unfinished claim, a living mother, a dead regent, and a letter from a woman the kingdom had buried for 19 years. Her life had not changed. It had detonated. She looked west into the dark and knew dawn would not bring peace. It would bring answers sharp enough to split the kingdom open all over again. and this time she would be standing at the center of the blade. Chapter 8. By dawn, Lyra had to choose between two women who had both buried her alive. The palace was quiet in the way battlefields were quiet after the dead had been counted and before the next wound opened. Smoke still clung to the stone outside her window. Somewhere below, servants moved softly through corridors that had seen too much blood in too few hours. The kingdom had not recovered overnight. It had merely learned how to hold its breath. Lyra stood outside the chamber where Mira was being kept and stared at the door, as if it might split into answers if she hated it hard enough. Kyle waited beside her in black court clothes, one shoulder still bandaged beneath the fabric where the arrow had gone in. He looked composed again, which almost offended her. She knew too well now what it cost him to wear control that cleanly. She also knew he had not slept. The shadows under his eyes gave him away, along with the dangerous stillness of a man already preparing for another war. "You have 10 minutes, he said quietly. Lyra kept her eyes on the door. "You sound generous. I sound like a king trying not to break his own promise." That pulled her gaze to him. The bond shifted the moment their eyes met, warming low beneath her skin, a constant dangerous thread now, less chaotic than before, somehow worse because it felt steadier, familiar, as though her body had already begun remembering him in ways her mind had not agreed to. "You think she'll lie," she said. "I think everyone who survives court long enough learns how." His gaze did not leave hers. "I also think lies told for love still leave scars." The words landed too close to her own heart to answer cleanly. His hand lifted, then stopped just short of her face, restraint made visible. That had become his most devastating habit, wanting, pausing, waiting, giving her room when every part of him looked built to take. "When you want me inside," he said, voice low. There were 100 things wrong with how that sentence affected her pulse. Lyra opened the door before he could see too much in her face. Mira stood by the narrow window in guarded grey. No chains on her wrists but 2 soldiers outside, and one visible mark of fresh bruising along her temple from the fight in the river ward. She turned when Lyra entered, and the shock that crossed her face was so naked it made anger easier to hold, easier than love, easier than grief, easier than the unbearable truth that Lyra had missed her even while hating her. "You came," Mira whispered. "I came because you don't get to vanish for 3 years and then reappear with my entire life in your hands." Lyra shut the door behind her. "Start talking." Pain flickered across Mira's face, then discipline cut it down. She had always been good at that. Lyra saw it now. The control, the calculated softness, the way she had raised a daughter under lies and called it tenderness. "The Queen's letter will bring more blood," Mira said, "if she truly sent it." "You think it might be false?" "I think dead women do not become living without leaving bodies behind." Mira stepped closer. "And I think too many people have used her name as a weapon already." Lyra folded her arms, as much shield as posture. "You don't get to warn me about weapons after using me as one." Mira flinched. "Good," Lyra thought with a bitterness that cut her on the way through. "I did not use you. You hid me, lied to me, let me mourn you, built my entire life on silence." Her voice tightened. "What would you call that?" Mira's eyes shone. "Protection. There it is." Lyra laughed once, sharp and joyless. "The favorite word of everyone who cages me." For a moment, Mira only looked at her. Then something old and exhausted entered her face, stripping away the spy, the survivor, the woman who could still hold a blade steady after burying half a kingdom in secrets. "When I took you from the Queen's bed," she said quietly, "you were so small you fit in one arm." She had already bled too much. She knew she would die before sunrise. She put the moonstone around your neck herself and told me, "If she lives, let her hate me later." Lyra's throat tightened despite herself. "She did not ask me to keep you comfortable," Mira continued. "She asked me to keep you breathing. I failed at many things, but not that. You left me." The words came out stripped clean. No anger. That made them worse. Mira's mouth trembled once. "Yes. Say why without dressing it up." For the first time, Mira hesitated like a woman who had run out of disguises. Because they found me, she said. Not once, repeatedly. The shadow circle was broken in pieces after the coup, but not fully. Every woman loyal to the Queen was hunted. I moved you through 3 villages, 2 mining camps, and a winter trade house before I understood the truth. Her gaze held Lyra's, unsparing now. They were not tracking me. They were tracking the moonstone. Cold ran through Lyra's spine. They had rituals, Mira said. Fragments of old court magic, blood readers, scent binders, men and women willing to cut children open looking for royal marks if it meant power. Her jaw tightened. Once they came within 1 room of you, Lyra stopped breathing. I killed them, Mira said. Then I realized as long as I stayed your mother in public, you would never disappear. So I let Miraval die. The chamber went silent, except for the fire snapping low in the hearth. Lyra had spent years imagining reasons, cowardice, betrayal, indifference, some softer failure she could survive hating. This was worse. This was love twisted into a knife and handed to necessity. I still buried you, she said. Mira's eyes closed briefly. I know. And you watched? A long pause. Yes. The answer hit harder than anything else. Lyra turned away sharply and crossed to the window because if she didn't put distance between them, the grief might become something uglier. Outside, the cliffs were washed in early grey light. Beyond them, the western sea waited somewhere cold and merciless, hiding either a queen or another grave. You said the Queen wanted me hidden, Lyra said, voice tighter now. Then why does she want me brought to her? Mira joined her slowly, stopping far enough away to feel the ache of it. Because if she is alive, she has run out of time. Lyra looked back. Meaning? Meaning the old blood is waking in you faster than anyone expected. Mira's gaze dropped to the moonstone. The wards answered you in the courtyard. The silver lines obeyed. And the bond? She stopped. Lyra's pulse betrayed her at once. What about it? Mira's expression grew complicated. Pain, understanding. Something almost like fear. The Queen believed if her daughter survived and the throne survived, one day they would be drawn together. She did not know whether it would save the kingdom or burn it down. Lyra stared. You knew? I suspected. Mira swallowed. The first time I saw him touch you in that chamber, I knew the old stories were not dead. Something raw moved under Lyra's skin. Shame, heat, fury at being readable, fury at being seen so clearly by the mother who had not earned that right anymore. You don't get to look at me like that. Like what? Like you understand what he does to me. Mira's face changed in a way that made Lyra immediately regret the words. Not because they weren't true, but because truth gave pain clearer edges. I understand more than you think, Mira said softly. The Queen loved a man she should never have touched. That is how you were born. That stunned Lyra quiet. Mira stepped closer, careful, as if approaching a wounded animal she recognized as her own. Power does not make desire less dangerous. It makes it harder to survive. If the Queen truly calls for you, she will not only want your face. She will want your choice. What choice? Whether you become what she hid. The sentence settled into the room like smoke. Lyra turned it over and found no comfort in any side of it. Princess, weapon, heir, mate. Every word felt like a crown made of sharpened bone. Before she could press harder, the door opened. Kyle entered without waiting for permission. He should not have been able to fill the room more completely than Payne already had. Yet somehow he did. His gaze flicked once to Lyra's face, took in everything she had not said aloud and darkened. Time. Mira's mouth hardened. I wasn't finished. Kyle looked at her as if patience was something he gave once and regretted immediately. You had 18 years. The blow landed. Lyra felt it physically, felt Mira absorb it without defense because there was none worth offering. Enough, Lyra said, more sharply than she intended. Both of them looked at her. The room tightened under the weight of 2 people who knew too much about losing her. I am done being spoken around, she said. You, she turned to Mira. You tell me half-truths as if pain counts as proof. Then to Kyle, and you decide what dangers I can hear about, as though silence will keep me softer. Kyle's jaw flexed. That is not what I'm doing. It is exactly what you do. Her pulse was pounding now, old hurt and fresh fury feeding each other. You call it protection. She calls it protection. Somehow it always ends with me standing in a room full of answers everyone else already weighed without me. He came closer, and the temperature in the chamber seemed to shift with him. Lyra, no! Her voice dropped, but the force in it held. If there is a queen alive on the western coast, I go. If she is bait, I face the trap with my eyes open. If she is real, then I hear from her mouth why I was worth hiding but not worth keeping. She drew in one unsteady breath. And neither of you will make this choice for me. The silence afterward was brutal. Mira looked wrecked. Kyle looked far worse, because he still had the strength to hide it. You will go over my objection? He asked at last, voice low. The question should have felt like a challenge. Instead, it sounded like something far more dangerous. A man asking how much ground would be left between them if she answered wrongly. Lyra met his gaze and forced herself not to flinch from everything burning in it. Yes. For one suspended second, she thought he might command her, might drag power through the bond and lock the entire palace around her. His wolf was that close to the surface. She could feel it prowling under his skin, furious at the thought of distance, of risk, of losing what it had only just found. Then he exhaled once. Slow, violent in its restraint. Then I go with you. The answer struck her harder than refusal would have. Mira closed her eyes briefly, like someone watching history sharpen its claws. Lyra's heartbeat stumbled. Kyle! That is not a negotiation. His gaze stayed on hers. You want your choice. Fine, take it. But you will not walk into the West without me. Something in his voice made the bond pull hard enough to mine. That dangerous memory whispered again. Only this time it sounded less like domination and more like a vow he was trying not to speak aloud. Mira looked between them, understanding too much. If the Queen still thinks like the woman I served, she will test you both. Kyle did not take his eyes off Lyra. Then let her try. The certainty in it nearly wrecked her composure. Not because it was controlling, because it was absolute. Because he had moved past the point of pretending distance would keep him safe from what she had become to him. Lyra forced her voice steady. When do we leave? Tonight, he said. The answer came from Celine at the doorway. None of them had heard her approach. The spy mistress stepped inside with wind at her back and tension in every line of her body. Scouts returned. Blackwater Abbey is standing. Coastal road is clear for 6 miles, then broken cliffs. Small escort only if we want speed. Her gaze moved from Mira to Lyra to the king. Also, there's one more problem. Kyle's expression flattened. There always is. Celine held out a folded scrap of dark parchment. This was nailed to the inner gate an hour ago. Kyle took it and unfolded the note. Lyra watched the colour leave his face by degrees so subtle most people would have missed them. She had learned him fast. Too fast. Enough to know when shock cut through control. Kyle? She said quietly. He handed her the note. The message was short. Bring the Moonblood girl to Blackwater Abbey before the next full tide. Come alone if you want the Queen alive. Come with the Alpha King if you want him to see what his mother did in the dark. No signature, no need. Lyra looked up slowly. Celine's mouth was grim. There's more on the back. Lyra turned the parchment. A symbol had been painted there in dried black ink, a crescent split by a vertical line. The mark from the Eastern soldiers, the one Mira had once burned from a scrap of paper. Mira went pale. I know that sigil, she whispered. Kyle's head snapped toward her. From where? Mira's eyes stayed fixed on the mark as if it had risen from one of her nightmares. It belonged to the Queen's hidden prison. The room went still. Lyra felt the bottom drop out from the day all over again. What prison? Mira lifted her gaze, horror and memory tearing through the careful control she had worn all morning. The one beneath Blackwater Abbey, she said. The one the Queen swore she would never use again. And suddenly the western coast no longer sounded like a reunion. It sounded like a burial ground with its mouth open. Kyle took the note back from Lyra and crushed it in his fist. "Prepare the horses," he said. Celine left at once. Mira caught Lyra's wrist before she could follow. "If the Queen is in Blackwater, she may not be a prisoner." Lyra's pulse thudded once, hard. "What are you saying?" Mira's face broke in a way that made the answer worse before it even arrived. "I'm saying," she whispered, "that the woman waiting for you may not need saving." Kyle turned at the door, his eyes locked on Lyra's. "Either way," he said, voice low and lethal, "we end this tonight." The bond flared hot between them, promise and danger tangled so tightly she could no longer separate them. Lyra touched the moonstone at her throat and looked from the dead sigil to the door to the two people who had spent years trying to keep her alive by tearing pieces out of her first. By nightfall she would be riding toward a queen who might be victim, liar, monster, or mother. And for the first time since stepping into the forbidden chamber, Lyra understood the most terrifying truth of all. Whatever waited for her at Blackwater Abbey was never only about the past. It was about what she would become once she faced it. And if the Queen in the West truly had something to do with the bond, the blood, and the cage of secrets built around her life, then someone had not merely hidden Lyra from the throne. Someone had been shaping her. Chapter 9. The ride to Blackwater Abbey began under moonlight and felt like a funeral no one had agreed to attend. The western road cut along the cliffs in a long strip of silver-grey stone, with the sea raging far below and the wind sharp enough to slice through wool and leather alike. Lyra rode between Kyle and Mira, wrapped in a dark cloak, the moonstone hidden beneath the fabric at her throat, and the king's scent pressed so close to her that the bond stayed restless all through the night. No one spoke for the first hour. It was not peace. It was tension sharpened into silence. Celine had insisted on sending only a small escort, Captain Mara, 6 of the king's best wolves, and 1 healer riding at the rear. Enough to strike fast, not enough to look like an army. Kyle had accepted because speed mattered more than ceremony now. Every mile they lost meant Blackwater had more time to prepare whatever waited there. The sea kept crashing below them like a warning. Lyra tried not to look at Mira. Failed. Tried not to look at Kyle. Failed at that too. He rode like war-made flesh, black-cloaked, broad-shouldered, one hand steady on the reins, the other never far from the sword at his hip. Every now and then his gaze cut to her with that brutal assessing intensity that always made her feel as though he was checking for blood, lies, or distance, maybe all 3. She should have been angry he came, part of her was. A louder part was fiercely, shamefully relieved. Just before dawn they stopped beneath a dead pine where the road narrowed and broke around a jagged outcrop. Mara dismounted to scout ahead. The healer checked the horses, the others spread in a silent perimeter. Lyra slid from the saddle and nearly stumbled when her knees hit the ground. The ride had shaken exhaustion through her bones until every muscle felt bruised. She moved toward the cliff edge for air and found Kyle there first, looking west where the sea swallowed the light. He turned at the sound of her step. "You should rest. You should stop saying that as though exhaustion listens to crowns." The answer almost earned that dangerous almost smile from him. Almost. Instead, his gaze dropped to the shadows beneath her eyes. "You're shaking. The wind is cold. The bond says otherwise." Her pulse betrayed her at once. She had not yet learned how to hide from the bond. Worse, she was beginning to understand that hiding from him was becoming just as difficult. "What does it say?" she asked quietly. His eyes held hers too long. "That you haven't slept since I found you in my chamber." The memory hit both of them at once. Steam, marble, his hand at her neck, the first crack of recognition. Lyra felt heat rise beneath the cold air and hated how quickly his gaze darkened in answer. "This is unfair," she murmured. "What is—" "You keep looking at me like that while pretending restraint makes you noble." Something changed in his face, not amusement. Something rough. I am not pretending restraint is noble, he said, voice low. I am practicing it because wanting more from you when you are this tired would make me dangerous. The truth in the sentence struck hard and low. Lyra looked away first. That was becoming a pattern she disliked. Do you always speak like a threat wrapped in honesty? His gaze stayed on her. Only when honesty stops being gentle, that should not have made her want to move closer. It did. She folded her arms tighter against the wind instead. Behind them, footsteps approached over gravel. Mira. Lyra felt the shift in herself before she turned. Grief had made room for anger again. Easier to hold. Easier to survive. Mira stopped a few feet away. She looked smaller in daylight. Less mythic than she had in the burning alley. More like the woman who once stitched Lyra's sleeves by candlelight and hummed while lying about the world. Blackwater sits another hour west, Mira said. There's an old bridge before the If the prison is still active, that's where they'll force a bottleneck. Kyle's expression hardened. How many entrances? 2 above ground, 1 beneath. Mira's eyes flicked to Lyra and back. If the lower passage still exists, it opens under the Abbey crypt. Still giving us half of everything, Kyle said coldly. Mira did not flinch. The rest depends on whether the Queen is there willingly. Lyra stepped in before the room between them became a battlefield. Tell me plainly. If she is there willingly, what does that mean? Mira's silence lasted too long. Meaning? Lyra pressed. Mira dragged in a slow breath. It means the hidden prison may not have remained a prison. It may have become a sanctuary, or a place to keep something alive that should never have survived. The cliff wind went colder. Kyle's hand closed around the hilt at his side. You speak in riddles again. Because the truth sounds mad, Mira snapped, the first fracture in her control finally breaking through. Because I served a queen who was gentle until someone threatened what she loved. And then I watched her become capable of things even her enemies feared. Because if she lived, she did not live unchanged. Lyra felt that sentence like a bruise forming. Something old and terrible waited in the west. Not merely a queen, a woman shaped by loss, blood, and survival into something harder to predict. Before anyone could press further, Mara returned from the ridge. The Abbey's in sight, she said. No visible banners, no open guards. That worries me more than an army. Kyle looked at Lyra. From here on, you stay beside me. The command should have irritated her. Instead, it settled somewhere inside her with a dangerous kind of warmth. She hated that too. Blackwater Abbey stood on the cliffs like a grave carved into the sea. It had once been beautiful, perhaps. There were still traces of it in the narrow windows, the weather-worn towers, the old moon carvings above the main gate. But the years had stripped most of the grace away. Salt had eaten the stone. Wind had hollowed the corners. The whole place looked like it had spent too long listening to waves beat themselves bloody below. No smoke rose from its chimneys, no bells rang, no voices drifted from the walls. Dead places should not feel like they were waiting. Yet this one did. Kyle lifted one hand, the escort halted, Mara and 2 wolves slipped ahead. Celine had not come, but her warning seemed to breathe out of every crack in the Abbey stone. Trap, stage, burial ground, whatever waited inside had chosen silence for a reason. Lyra stared at the split crescent carved faintly above the gate. The same sigil. The same one from the parchment. From the soldiers. From the scrap Mira had burned. A shiver moved through her body. Kyle noticed at once. He moved closer without touching her, the heat of him brushing the cold. What is it? That mark, Lyra pointed. It feels wrong. Mira's face went pale. It wasn't only the prison's symbol. Everyone looked at her. She swallowed once, hard. It was the Queen's seal when she wrote orders no council could see. Silence hit. Lyra's heartbeat stumbled. You're saying my mother. I'm saying, Mira said, voice fraying now, that if those soldiers carried it, someone in Blackwater inherited the Queen's darkest work. The gate opened. No one touched it. The iron door simply groaned inward, as if the Abbey itself had heard enough, and decided to stop pretending. Inside, the courtyard lay empty. A dry fountain cracked through the center. Black moss climbed the walls. The air smelled of salt, dust, and old candle wax. Then footsteps echoed from the cloister. A woman emerged in a dark veil, carrying no weapon and wearing no sign of rank except the way the entire ruined abbey seemed to bend around her. Lyra knew her face before the veil fell. Kyle stopped breathing. The Queen had his eyes. Older, yes, thinner. A pale scar running along one cheekbone, white threaded through her dark hair, but no grave could have mistaken that face. She looked like a memory sharpened by years and grief into something still beautiful and far more dangerous. "Kyle," she said softly. The king beside Lyra went rigid enough to feel carved from the same stone as the abbey walls. His mother looked at him with unmistakable pain. Then she looked at Lyra. Everything in her changed, not softened, deepened. Shock, hunger, recognition, something almost sacred and terribly human all at once. Her gaze fixed on the moonstone hidden beneath Lyra's cloak, as if she could see straight through wool, skin, and years. "My daughter," she whispered. The words struck harder than any scream could have. Lyra's entire body went cold. Kyle stepped in front of her so fast, the move was almost instinct. Pure alpha, pure protection. His voice came out low and lethal. "You do not get to say that first." The Queen's eyes shifted to him. "Then perhaps I should begin with, 'I am sorry.'" The answer was so insufficient it almost sounded cruel. Kyle laughed once. There was no warmth in it. "You disappeared for 19 years. I was dying. You got better." Pain flickered across her face. Not quickly. Not enough, apparently. The escort behind them stayed silent, but tension had become a living thing in the courtyard. Mara's hand hovered near her blade. Mira looked as though she might collapse under the weight of memory and unfinished loyalties. The Queen took one slow step forward. Kyle's hand went to his sword. She stopped instantly. "I did not summon you to wound you again," she said. "You summoned her," he replied, not taking his body out of Lyra's path. "You threatened me to do it." Her gaze lowered briefly, "Because if you came by choice, you might still have turned back before hearing what matters." Lyra found her voice at last, sharp from everything it had travelled through to reach the surface. "Then say it." The Queen looked at her fully. It was unbearable, being seen by the woman whose absence had shaped half the kingdom. Worse to realize, part of Lyra's face had likely belonged to her all along. "I hid you because the old king wanted you dead," the Queen said. "I stayed away because the men who overthrew him did not stop hunting what my blood could produce." Her eyes darkened. "And I called you here because the prison beneath this abbey was not built to keep enemies in." Lyra's pulse pounded. "Then what was it for?" The Queen's expression turned strange, old, haunted, to keep the first moon heirs from devouring their mates. The sea seemed to roar louder below the cliffs. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Lyra stared at her, sure she had heard wrong. "What?" The Queen's eyes shifted to Kyle. "The bond you feel is older than court rights. Older than the throne itself. It was never meant to join weak blood. When it does, it remains beautiful. Possessive. Dangerous. When it joins blood like yours, like mine once did, it becomes something else." Cold crawled under Lyra's skin. Kyle's voice went flat enough to cut. "Explain, carefully." The Queen held her son's gaze. The first queens of this line carried moon-gifted blood. Their mates were chosen by the old bond. Together they strengthened kingdoms. But the bond was never gentle. It sharpened instinct into obsession, hunger into law. Some queens could bear it, some could not. When the blood was too strong and the mating bond struck too violently, the Queen could lose herself before the claiming was completed. She paused. And if the mate tried to resist, the damage was worse. Lyra felt the bond under her skin, as if it had heard its own name and risen. Kyle took half a step back, not from Lyra, but from the idea of harm, from the possibility. The Queen saw it and closed her eyes briefly. "That is why I buried the records, why I sealed Blackwater, why I hoped the line might die with me." Lyra's throat tightened. "You didn't hide me only from the throne." No, the Queen whispered. I hid you from what you might become if the bond woke too soon. The courtyard tilted around the truth. Lyra thought of the chamber, the first touch, the savage flare, the possessive ache that kept deepening every time Kyle's hand brushed her skin, the way her wolf surged toward him even while her pride fought it, the way his control looked less like temper and more like warfare. No wonder. Kyle's voice was rougher now, stripped down. You're telling me if I claim her? The Queen did not soften the answer. You may not be able to stop. The words hit like a blade buried to the hilt. Silence fell with teeth. Lyra looked at Kyle. He looked wrecked in a way she had never seen before. Not visibly, not openly, but in the terrible care with which he held himself still. As if even his breathing needed governing now. As if every instinct in him had just become suspect to himself. The Queen saw that too. Kyle, do not! His voice cracked like ice. Do not say my name as if you have a right to comfort me with it. The blow landed cleanly. The Queen absorbed it without defense. Perhaps because she had none. Lyra's own voice shook when she asked the question that mattered most. Why send for me now? The Queen answered her without hesitation. Because the bond has already begun, and once the next full tide rises, it will press harder. If you do nothing, it may still consume you both by inches. If you claim recklessly, it may break you both by force. Her gaze locked onto Lyra's. There is only one way to anchor it safely. Kyle's hand tightened on his sword. What way? The Queen looked at him, then at Lyra, and for the first time real fear entered her face. A blood rite, she said, performed in the crypt below. Mara swore under her breath. Mira went still as death. Lyra's pulse slammed. What kind of blood rite? She asked. The Queen did not answer immediately. That hesitation told them everything it needed to. Kyle's eyes turned murderous. Start speaking. The Queen drew one slow breath. One of you must yield full control before the moon altar. The silence afterward was huge. Lyra stared. Yield? The Queen's voice lowered. Body, blood, bond, power. If the rite accepts the surrender, it tempers the obsession and steadies the claiming. If it rejects the surrender... She stopped. Kyle finished it for her, every word edged like a drawn blade. It kills the weaker one. The Queen did not deny it. The sea kept crashing below the cliffs. The abbey courtyard had become a trap of a different kind now. No arrows, no soldiers, nothing simple enough to fight with steel. Only truth, blood, and the unbearable knowledge that the thing pulling Lyra and Kyle together might also be the thing waiting to destroy them if they reached for it wrongly. Lyra looked at the Queen. You knew all this, and still you threatened him to bring me here. The Queen's face flinched with real pain. Because if I failed to bring you before the full tide, you would both walk blind into a bond strong enough to ruin the kingdom. Kyle did not look away from Lyra. Then we leave. That startled her. He turned to face her fully, and the bond between them burned hard enough to ache. We leave now. The Queen took a sharp step forward. If you ride out without the right, I would rather tear this place down stone by stone than let you put her on an altar without understanding every inch of the cost. The force in his voice shook the courtyard. Lyra's own chest tightened painfully. The Queen looked from son to daughter and seemed to understand, perhaps too late, that the greatest danger in the abbey was no longer only the bond. It was choice. Lyra's choice. Kyle's choice. And what they would do if the only safe path demanded the kind of surrender neither had ever given anyone. A bell rang deep beneath the abbey. Once, then again, not from above, from below. Everyone froze, Mira's face emptied of colour. No, Kyle's hand flashed to his sword. The Queen turned toward the crypt entrance in naked horror. Lyra saw it first in her face, the realization that whatever waited beneath Blackwater had not stayed waiting. Then came the sound, a low, ragged howl rising from under the stone, human enough to terrify, wolf enough to chill the blood. The Queen whispered, "It woke." Kyle stepped in front of Lyra again, Pure instinct, pure possession, pure refusal to let the dark below even look at her. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs. The crypt door at the far end of the courtyard shuddered once. Then a woman's voice rose from beneath the abbey stones, cracked with madness and grief and something far older than either. "Bring me the moon-blood heir." The queen closed her eyes like a woman finally watching her worst secret crawl into daylight. And when she opened them again, she said the one thing capable of turning the entire night even colder. "That," she whispered, "is your father's first mate." Chapter 10. The crypt door burst open before anyone could ask the next question. A woman climbed out of the darkness below Blackwater Abbey like something the earth had failed to keep buried. Her hair hung in silver-black ropes around a face ravaged more by grief than age. One side of her throat bore an old bite scar twisted pale and ugly. Her white dress had once been ceremonial. Now it looked like a shroud dragged through blood and dust and years of confinement. Her eyes landed on Lyra, and Lyra understood at once why the queen had looked afraid. This woman was beautiful in the ruined way storms were beautiful from a window, until the glass broke. "The moon-blood heir," the stranger whispered, voice cracked raw. "At last." Kael's body blocked Lyra completely. The move was instant, instinctive, hard enough to send a pulse through the bond that felt dangerously close to pain. His hand went to his sword. His shoulders turned. Wolf and king and male power aligned in one brutal message. "Mine to protect." The woman laughed. The sound scraped the courtyard raw. "There he is," she said, gaze moving over Kael with ugly delight. "The son of the thief." The queen stepped forward, face pale. "Elaris." So this was Elaris, the first mate, the woman Lyra's father had once been bound to before the queen tore history apart with a love she was never supposed to touch. Elaris smiled at the queen with all the softness of a slit throat. "You kept me hungry too long." Kael's voice dropped into something edged enough to cut the air. "Speak carefully." Elaris looked at him, really looked. Then her smile widened with terrible understanding. "Ah, you feel her already. Good, let it sink deeper." Her gaze shifted toward where Lyra stood behind him. "Come forward, girl." "No," Kael said. The word hit the courtyard like a slammed gate. Elaris inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring. "Your bond is hot and unfinished. Your blood is louder than hers already." Her eyes lifted to Lyra again. "If you do not come willingly, the full tide will drag you both into the old madness exactly as it dragged him." Lyra's pulse stumbled. "My father—" For 1 second, pain moved across Elaris's face. Real. Shocking. Then it twisted into something far more dangerous. "Yes," she said, "your father, who should have belonged to me until death. Your father, who let a moon queen look at him once and forgot how to breathe without her." Her stare turned savage. "Your father, who split the old bond open with betrayal so violent it poisoned every line after his—" The queen shut her eyes briefly, like a woman hearing her own sins recited in a holy place. Lyra stepped sideways before Kael could stop her and came into view. His hand caught her wrist instantly. Heat lanced through her. Warning, possession, panic hidden under iron. "Lyra." She looked at him. The command he did not speak was obvious in every line of him. "Stay back. Let me stand between you and the thing that wants to devour your name." But she had spent too much of her life behind other people's lies already. She squeezed his hand once and pulled free. The shift in his face nearly broke her stride. Fury, fear, the terrible effort of not dragging her back himself. Elaris watched it all and laughed softly. "There, the beginning," her head tilted. "You want her close enough to scent, close enough to mark, close enough to lock the world out and keep only her." Her eyes glittered. "And you think you are strong because you haven't done it yet." Kael took one slow step forward. "You mistake restraint for weakness." "No," Elaris said. "I mistake young wolves for liars." The queen turned to Lyra, voice suddenly urgent. "Do not listen to her cruelty as prophecy." Elaris snapped toward her. "Cruelty? You want cruelty named?" She spread her arms toward the abbey, toward the crypt, toward all the old hidden rot beneath it. You brought me here and buried me alive because I would not release him. Mira inhaled sharp. Lyra's gaze whipped to the Queen. You imprisoned her? The Queen's face went still with old guilt. I sealed Blackwater because she had become dangerous. Elaris smiled with broken teeth and remembered hate. Say the whole thing. No one spoke. So Elaris did. I became dangerous because he rejected the first bond to follow her. The words cracked through the courtyard. Lyra went cold. Elaris stepped closer, chains clinking softly from somewhere beneath the torn skirts of her dress. Your father was bound to me by ritual before he ever looked at your mother. It was not a full true mating, but it was enough for blood, enough for law, enough for the old wolves to call it destiny. Then he met the Queen. Her laugh came back, scraped raw and terrible. He shattered the bond for her. Do you know what that does to a woman carrying moon-touched blood? The Queen answered before anyone else could. It breaks her. Elaris turned on her. It changes her. Lyra's skin prickled. The Queen's voice was steady, but only by force. When the first bond was broken, the old blood inside her turned feral. She began to hear mates where none existed, feel claims where none were given. She killed 3 women in a single winter because their wolves had brushed too near his scent. The Queen swallowed. By the time we sealed her in Blackwater, she had stopped distinguishing love from hunger. Elaris's smile vanished. For the first time only grief remained. And he still died with her name on his mouth, she whispered. The sentence struck the whole courtyard quiet. Lyra felt something twist inside her. Not pity, not fully, something worse. Understanding sharpened by terror. This was not merely what obsession looked like after too much time. This was what happened when love, power, rejection, and old blood tore through each other until nothing human remained untouched. Elaris lifted her gaze to Lyra. Now tell me, little heir, when he touched you in that chamber, did the world narrow? Lyra said nothing. Elaris laughed softly. When he kissed you in the ruins, did it feel like drowning and surviving at once? Kyle's jaw locked. Elaris saw it and grew brighter, crueler. When you sleep, do you wake searching for his scent? The bond under Lyra's skin pulsed hard enough to hurt. That was answer enough. Elaris's eyes glinted with triumph and warning both. Good. Then hear me clearly. The full tide is coming. The bond will crest with it. If you try to keep refusing what your blood wants, you will drive each other to the edge by denial. If you claim badly, you will ruin each other by force. She looked at Kyle. And if he loses control first, she will bleed. Kyle moved so fast the escort jolted. His sword was at Elaris's throat in a breath. The courtyard held still. You will not speak of her bleeding again. The words were low, not loud, which made them far worse. Elaris did not flinch from the blade. There it is, she whispered. The old possession. The lovely violence. Lyra should have told him to lower the sword. Instead, she was staring at his profile and feeling the devastating pull of being defended by a man who looked one breath away from killing madness with his bare hands for speaking her fear aloud. The Queen's voice cut through the tension. Stop! No one listened. Then Lyra stepped forward and put her hand on Kyle's wrist. The contact sent a live current through them both. His blade did not lower immediately. His breathing roughened once. Then, with visible effort, he drew the sword back. Elaris looked at Lyra's hand on him and smiled with bitter certainty. You are already inside him. The truth of it landed everywhere. Kyle sheathed the sword with a violence that promised later. Enough! We came for answers. We have them. You have the beginning, Elaris said, not the cure. The Queen's shoulders tightened. There may not be one. There is, Elaris said. Her gaze moved between Lyra and Kyle. But you will hate it. Mira muttered something under her breath that sounded very close to a prayer. Lyra spoke first. Say it. Elaris lifted one thin finger toward the crypt below. The blood rite your mother mentioned is real, but she lied by mercy. Her eyes settled on Kyle. Yield is not symbolic. One of you must kneel fully before the other at the moon altar and surrender the right to dominate the bond. The one who yields becomes the anchor. The one who is given dominance must hold it without consuming what is offered. Her smile turned jagged. Most fail. The sea roared below. Kyle looked at the Queen. You knew. I knew enough not to trust the right easily. Meaning you hid the cost. I hid the risk because I would rather have been hated for delay than see either of you pushed into that crypt by panic. Lyra laughed once, frayed and furious. Everyone in my life keeps deciding what terror I can survive, then survive this one with your eyes open, Ilaris said sharply. Lyra's gaze cut to her. The madwoman's stare was suddenly terrifyingly lucid. If the bond is not anchored before the full tide, Ilaris said, the first claiming impulse at moonrise will strike like a wound. He will want to mark. You will want to yield and fight it at the same time. If you separate, you'll bleed from the strain. If you stay together, every touch will sharpen the hunger until one of you breaks first. She looked at Kyle. And kings do not break quietly. The bond seemed to tighten around Lyra's ribs. Kyle's expression gave nothing away now. That was worse. It meant he was already thinking like a ruler again, measuring risk, damage, sacrifice. She knew that look. She hated that look, because it usually meant he was about to choose pain if it spared her worse. Ilaris saw it too. There. He's deciding for you already. Lyra turned fast enough to catch the almost imperceptible shift in him. It was true. Of course it was true. What are you planning? She demanded. Nothing. His gaze met hers, dark and impenetrable. We are not doing the right tonight. That isn't what I asked. It is the answer that matters. The answer that matters, she shot back, is whether you are about to try to carry this bond alone because some twisted part of you thinks I should be spared the choice. His jaw flexed. Silence. Then Ilaris laughed. There, she sees you clearly. You are more fortunate than her father was. Kyle ignored her. We retreat. We regroup. We verify every step of the right. By when? Lyra demanded. Tomorrow? The next tide? After the bond decides for us? His gaze sharpened. I am not kneeling you at an altar in front of this place and these ghosts on the word of a woman the Queen chained underground. The raw force behind the sentence shook her. And still... And if waiting destroys us faster? Lyra asked. That struck cleanly. She saw it land in him, saw the fear behind the king, the male behind the crown, the man who had carried restraint like a blade since the chamber, and had just been told that restraint itself might become another road to ruin. Before he could answer, the abbey floor trembled. Once, then again. Mara spun toward the crypt. Movement. The escort drew weapons. The Queen went white. Ilaris's smile died. What now? Kyle demanded. The Queen's voice came thin and horrified. I sealed more than her. The crypt stairs erupted. Stone cracked outward. Dust and bone fragments blasted across the courtyard. Wolves surged. Mira dragged Lyra back just as something huge slammed through the broken doorway and hit the abbey floor on all fours. It had once been a wolf. Now it looked like one of the old bloodrights had been skinned alive and given fangs. Its fur was blackened silver, its body too large, twisted by scars, one eye milk white, the other blazing unnatural blue. Chains dragged from its hind leg. Moon sigils had been burned into its rib cage. Its jaws parted, and a human scream came out of a wolf's throat. The escort staggered. Even Kyle went still. The Queen whispered the name like a punishment returned from the dead. Theron. Lyra's heart dropped. Her father. No, not her father, what was left of him. The creature lifted its head and looked straight at Lyra. Then it howled, and every bond in the courtyard answered. Chapter 11. Pain tore through Lyra so hard her knees buckled. The moonstone blazed against her chest. Kyle reached her before she hit the stone, one arm locking around her waist, the other ripping his sword free as the monstrous wolf lunged. Back! The command shattered through the courtyard. Mara and the royal wolves moved instantly. Steel flashed. Mira's blades sang. The Queen raised a trembling hand and silver wardlight burst from the abbey walls, striking the creature broadside. It staggered but did not fall. Instead, It turned its ruined head toward the Queen and made that horrible half-human sound again, a sound like grief skinned alive. Lyra stared through the pain. The beast's eyes were wrong. Its body was wrong. But somewhere underneath all that ruined flesh and moon-burned fur, a terrible familiarity pulsed. The old blood in her recognized him before her mind accepted the horror. Her father had not died. He had been remade. "Do not look at him too long," Elaris snapped. Lyra tore her gaze away too late. The bond pain sharpened, dragging through her body like claws. Kyle tightened his hold on her at once. "What is it doing?" he demanded. Elaris had gone pale with something so close to fear it made her look suddenly human. He was the first failed anchor. The words landed in the middle of battle like a second explosion. Kyle's eyes flashed toward her. "Speak while breathing. The rite was attempted when the old bond broke," Elaris said. He tried to take both bonds into himself. "Mine, hers." She pointed wildly at the Queen. "The moon altar tore him apart instead of choosing—" The Queen's face crumpled with old devastation. "We thought he died." "You thought what was convenient." Theron lunged again. Kyle shoved Lyra behind him and met the creature head-on. Their collision shook the courtyard. The beast was enormous, wrong with moon rage and ritual damage, but Kyle was still Kyle. The Alpha King drove his sword into its shoulder and twisted. The creature screamed, snapped, and nearly took his arm with it. Mara's wolves hit from the flank. Mira vaulted onto a fallen pillar and buried a blade to the hilt in the creature's side. It kept moving. Lyra saw the truth then with brutal clarity. Steel would slow it, not stop it. The bond pain hit again when the beast looked at her. Not attraction, recognition. Blood calling to blood through something deformed and ritual sick. The Queen staggered toward Lyra. "He's responding to the airline." Lyra jerked back. "You think I didn't notice? This is why I sealed Blackwater. This is why you should have burned it." The Queen flinched. Good, some part of Lyra thought savagely. Good. Let guilt cut her too. The beast threw Mara's captain across the courtyard and lunged straight for Lyra again. Kyle shifted. The transformation tore through the air in a blast of black fur, massive shoulders, gold eyes, and pure murderous force. His wolf hit Theron in mid-air and drove him into the abbey wall hard enough to crack stone. Snarls ripped through the courtyard. Teeth flashed. Claws struck sparks from ruined rock. The two beasts crashed through the dead fountain in a spray of dust and broken marble. Lyra's heart slammed so hard it hurt. Kyle was stronger. Kyle was faster. But Theron fought like pain had replaced instinct years ago and left nothing to lose. He slashed across Kyle's flank. Blood hit the stones. "No." The word tore out of Lyra before she knew it existed. Theron's ruined eyes snapped toward her. Every wolf in the courtyard felt it. The pivot. The choice. He stopped trying to kill Kyle. He started trying to reach Lyra. Elaris's voice cracked through the chaos. He wants the bloodline completed. If he takes her to the altar, the old rite will try to finish through her. The world narrowed into sick, brutal possibility. Kyle heard too. His wolf hit Theron with enough force to split another pillar, but the creature twisted free and hurled him aside long enough to launch for life. Mira moved first. She threw herself between Lyra and the beast without hesitation. Theron's claws went through her. Lyra screamed. Time split open. Mira fell to her knees, blood pouring over her hands, and still she drove one of her blades upward under Theron's jaw with a mother's last violence. The creature reeled. Mara's wolves dragged it sideways. Kyle's black wolf crashed into it again from the left and bit deep into its throat. The courtyard became blood and roaring and shattered moonlight. Lyra dropped beside Mira. Her mother's body shook once, hard. Blood soaked her grey dress in a widening black-red bloom. Her face had gone pale, lips trembling with the effort of staying conscious. "No," Lyra whispered, hands pressing uselessly against the wound. "No, no, no!" Mira's bloody fingers caught her wrist. "Listen, Lyra was already crying and hadn't realized it until then. "Don't," she choked. "Don't do this to me again." A broken smile tried to touch Mira's mouth. "This one's real." The truth of that nearly tore Lyra apart. Kyle and Theron slammed into the crypt steps behind them. Stone gave way. Wolves shouted. The Queen was screaming orders Lyra barely heard. None of it mattered. The whole world had narrowed to blood under her hands, and the woman who had loved her wrongly, but fiercely enough to die for her twice. "I was angry at you," Lyra said, voice collapsing. "I'm still angry at you. You should be. You left me." "I know." Mira coughed blood. Lyra sobbed once through clenched teeth and pressed harder at the wound, as if force alone could keep life from leaving. Mira's gaze shifted past her shoulder, toward the battle, toward Kyle's black wolf trying to tear a monster father out of the world before it dragged his daughter into ritual madness. "Choose him cleanly," Mira whispered. Lyra froze. Mira looked back at her, eyes wet now, all the lies burned away by pain. "That is the one mercy I can still give you. Choose him before someone chooses for you." The words hit like a hand around the heart. "Mama." It was the first time Lyra had called her that in years. Mira's breath caught. Her bloody hand lifted weakly and touched Lyra's face. "There you are." Then another howl ripped through the courtyard. Lyra looked up just in time to see Theron throw Kyle into the crypt arch and drag himself toward the moon altar below, half dead and still reaching for her. The Queen spun toward Lyra, horror and certainty colliding in her expression. "He's going to force the rite." Kyle, bleeding and half-shifted now, pushed himself up through broken stone with murder in his eyes. Lyra looked down at Mira, at the blood, at the woman dying in front of her after a lifetime of choosing badly in order to love at all. Choose him cleanly. Behind her, the altar bells started ringing. The full tide had begun. Mira's fingers slipped from Lyra's cheek. Chapter 12. The crypt below Blackwater Abbey smelled like salt, blood, and old vows rotting in stone. Lyra ran toward the moon altar while battle crashed around her. Behind her, the Queen shouted for the wolves to seal the stairs. Ahead of her, Theron dragged his ruined body over the crypt floor with impossible purpose, blood and silver froth staining the old moon symbols carved into the slabs. Kyle was already descending after him, one hand braced on the wall, the other bloody on his sword, his face no longer fully human. The full tide struck the bond as Lyra hit the last stair, pain first, then hunger. Then the terrible dizzying certainty that Kyle's scent was the only true thing left in the world. She almost stumbled from it. Her wolf surged toward him, her skin burned. Somewhere above, the sea thundered against the cliffs as if the entire coast had turned heartbeat. Theron reached the altar. It stood at the center of the crypt, on a raised circle of black stone veined with silver, moon symbols spiraling outward from a shallow basin carved into its heart. Old blood stained it. Old power, too. The whole room felt awake, in a way no dead place should have felt. Theron slammed one clawed hand into the basin. Silver fire erupted. The crypt shook. Ilaris's scream echoed from above. "Don't let him call the altar!" Kyle moved faster. He hit Theron from the side just as the beast lunged for Lyra. They crashed across the altar steps in a tangle of claws, blood, and snarling rage. Lyra seized the moonstone at her throat and felt it burning hot enough to blister skin. The Queen staggered to the crypt entrance, one hand on the wall, old power gathering visibly around her. "Lyra! The stone!" Theron turned at the sound of her voice. For one suspended heartbeat, Father and Queen looked at each other across a crypt built from the wreckage of all their choices. Then Theron screamed, not with madness this time, but with something horrifyingly close to recognition. The Queen flinched like she had been struck. Kyle's wolf used the opening and tore into Theron's shoulder. The beast howled and threw him off hard enough to crack another altar step. Lyra ran, not away, into the center. The full tide hit fully as her feet crossed the moon circle. The bond ignited, heat slammed through her body, her knees weakened. Every instinct in her screamed one thing at once: find him, touch him, let him claim, end the ache. This was what the Queen had feared. This was what Elaris had warned of, and this was why waiting had become impossible. Theron smelled it too. He lunged for Lyra with broken mate hunger and old blood rage, desperate to finish through the air what he had failed to survive through himself. Kyle got there first. He slammed between them, black wolf and king and male ferocity fused into one brutal force. Theron's claws scored across his chest. Kyle's bite crushed through the monster's throat. Blood exploded over the altar. The crypt went still except for the wet, choking sound Theron made as he collapsed. For 1 second, all Lyra could hear was her own breathing. Then Theron looked up at her. The madness had thinned in his ruined eye. Only for a heartbeat. Only enough for her to see the man he had been and the grief he had become. Lunarith, he rasped. Her mother's old house name, a daughter's name. Then the light in him went out. Silence fell. Kyle turned toward Lyra. Everything in the crypt changed. Theron's death did not ease the bond. It sharpened it. The altar, awakened by blood and airline and full tide, had taken notice. The silver veins in the floor blazed. The moonstone burned like a second pulse at her throat. Kyle's wolf was still too close to the surface, gold drowning his eyes, blood and instinct and possessive need radiating off him hard enough to make the air feel too thin. He took 1 step toward her. Lyra's body answered before her mind could. Heat flashed low and violent. Her breath caught. Her hands shook with the effort of not reaching for him first. Kyle saw that. The pain in his face nearly undid her. "Don't come closer," he said. The command was rough, torn from him. Lyra's heart twisted. "Kyle, don't—" He sounded like the word was being dragged over broken glass. The Queen reached the bottom stair with Elaris behind her. Both women pale, both carrying the look of people who knew the next few breaths might decide a kingdom and 2 lives. Mira had not followed. The absence hit Lyra like a bruise she didn't have time to feel. Elaris stared at the altar and whispered, "It's fully awake." The Queen looked at Lyra. "Now you choose." Kyle's breathing had gone ragged. Not from weakness, from restraint so violent it had become visible. Every part of him was fighting himself. His body wanted forward, his wolf wanted closer. His power was rolling through the crypt in waves, shuddering the torchlight. Lyra understood then with devastating clarity. He was not afraid of the bond anymore. He was afraid of himself inside it. "Tell me what happens," she demanded, voice shaking. No mercy, no half-truth. The Queen gave it to her at last. "If you leave this crypt unanchored, the bond will hunt itself through both of you until one breaks. If you try to claim without the right, instinct may take over before consent can hold. If you perform the rite, one of you kneels and yields dominance. The other receives it and proves worthy by not destroying what is offered." Kyle spoke through clenched teeth. "We are not doing this." Elaris laughed softly, almost sadly. "The altar disagrees." The moon symbols beneath their feet flared brighter. Lyra could feel it now, the pull, the pressure. Something old and female and merciless beneath the stone, demanding decision. Kyle took another step back from her. That hurt more than it should have. "Do not," he said, voice shredded now. "Do not offer yourself because you think I can bear it cleanly." The words landed, because he already knew what choice she was considering. Because he feared he would fail her inside it. Because that fear was making him pull away now, while every part of the bond screamed to close the distance. Lyra looked at him and suddenly saw the entire shape of his love. Not in the threats, not in the possession, not in the violence he would gladly turn on the world. Here, in the refusal to take what he wanted most if there was any chance it would ruin her. Choose him cleanly. Mira's dying words rose through her like a blade. Lyra stepped onto the altar. Everyone went still. Kyle's expression changed instantly. "No." The word shook the crypt. She met his gaze and felt the full tide between them like a live storm. "You told me once you would not force this unless I asked." His chest rose sharply. "Lyra, I'm asking now." Pain crossed his face. Pure, unhidden. "Do not do this to save me. I'm not." Her voice steadied as she said it, because truth often arrived hardest when there was no time left to avoid it. "I'm doing it because I choose you." The crypt fell silent enough to hear the sea. Kyle stared at her, as if she had reached into his chest and closed her hand around the one part of him he had never offered anyone. Lyra felt tears burning now and ignored them. "I choose you with all of it," she said. "The danger, the hunger, the power, the fear." She took one more step onto the center of the moon circle. "And I would rather kneel by my own will than spend the rest of my life being dragged by everyone else's." The Queen closed her eyes. Elaris whispered something that sounded like a blessing and a curse tangled together. Kyle looked destroyed. Lyra. Her name left him like prayer and wound both. "You do not know what you are asking me to hold." She smiled then, small and brutal and shaken all through. "Yes, I do. That is why I'm asking you." The altar woke fully. Silver fire raced through the crypt floor. The moonstone broke free from its chain and lifted from her throat into the air above the basin, glowing so bright it hurt to look at. The force of it pulled her cloak back, spilled silver through her hair, lit every old carving carved into the black stone. A voice rose from the altar. Female, ancient, merciless. Kneel, air. Lyra's pulse hammered. She went to her knees. The moment they hit stone, the bond flared hot enough to tear a sound from her throat. Kyle staggered as if struck. Every instinct in him rebelled. She could see it. The male, the alpha, the king, the wolf, all of it howling against the sight of her kneeling to him in blood and moonlight. His hands clenched, his eyes burned pure gold. His whole body shook with the effort not to seize her and drag her back up. The altar voice came again. "Will you yield by choice?" Lyra lifted her chin. "Yes." The answer ripped through her, through him, through the crypt itself, the basin at the altar's center filled with silver light. A second voice rose, deeper, harder. "Then let the chosen dominate without consuming. Step forward, mate of the air." Kyle did not move. The Queen whispered, "If you refuse now, the altar will reject her offering." Elaris added quietly, "And it may kill her for the insult." That did it. Kyle crossed the distance like a man walking into his own execution. He stopped before Lyra, blood on his chest, black wolf still prowling under his skin, eyes full of so much hunger and terror and devotion that it hurt to look at him. "Look at me," he said. She did. His voice shook once, then steadied by force. "If I take this, I do it as your choice, never as your cage." The tears she had been fighting finally spilled. "Yes." He knelt before her. The movement stunned everyone. Even the altar seemed to hesitate. Kyle reached up and cupped her face with blood-stained hands. "Then hear me before whatever old power listens below this stone." His forehead touched hers. "I will not own what is not given. I will not break what kneels to me. I will not use this bond to silence the woman I would burn kingdoms to keep breathing." The vow shattered something inside Lyra in the best and most terrible way. The altar blazed white. The ancient voice rose, ringing now through the crypt like a bell struck inside bone. Accepted. Silver fire poured over them both. Lyra cried out as the bond changed shape. The hunger did not vanish. It deepened, then steadied, as if someone had taken a blade from her ribs and melted it into something fierce but bearable. Kyle jerked once, hard, as the force of dominance struck him fully. Not power over her, responsibility for her. The difference mattered. The altar made it matter. The moonstone dropped into the basin. Blood appeared in it. Not from nowhere, from Kyle. A shallow line split across his palm, then across Lyra's. The ancient voice spoke a final command. "Seal." Kyle looked at her. Everything was in that look. Need, love, fear, permission asked one last time, even here, even now, even after vows and blood and all the old merciless magic had already chosen. Lyra answered by leaning forward first. His mouth met hers over the altar. The claiming kiss was nothing like the first one in the ruined chamber, and nothing like the careful one by the window. This was deeper, slower, fierce in a different way. The full tide surged through them both and found no fracture now, only answered choice. His hand slid to the back of her neck, her fingers knotted in his shirt. Heat rolled through the crypt in waves. Her wolf rose and bowed and reached for him all at once. His power wrapped around her without crushing. When his teeth grazed the side of her throat, Lyra shuddered. He stopped instantly, still asking, still waiting. She turned her head and gave him the line of her neck. Kyle made a sound so low and broken it nearly undid her. Then he bit. Pain flashed. Then fire. Then relief so vast it felt like drowning in moonlight. The bond locked. The crypt shook once and went still. Every torch lowered. Every silver vein dimmed to a soft, steady glow. And in the center of Blackwater Abbey, kneeling in blood and old power and hard-won choice, Lyra felt the terrible hunger settle into something cleaner. Not gone. Never gone. But hers now. The mark at her throat burned hot beneath Kyle's mouth as he drew back. His eyes were no longer wild. Still gold. Still dangerous. But clear. Anchored. He touched the fresh claim mark as if he could not quite believe he had been trusted with it. Then he looked at her the way starving men looked at salvation after surviving long enough to forget they believed in it. "My queen," he said. This time the words did not feel like a sentence. They felt like home with tea. Chapter 13. Mira died before dawn. Lyra reached her in time to hear one last breath and feel one last weak squeeze of the fingers. Not enough time for another answer. Not enough time for forgiveness shaped into words. Only enough for presence, which sometimes had to be the final mercy. Kyle stood behind Lyra in the chamber where the healers had laid Mira's body cleanly, respectfully, as if tenderness could make death less blunt. The fresh claim mark on Lyra's throat still burned in quiet pulses beneath the high collar of her dress. The bond between her and Kyle had gone strangely calm after the rite. Stronger, deeper, not silent, never silent, but no longer clawing at her from inside. She could feel him behind her without looking, feel the steadiness he held around both of them like a shield. Mira's face looked younger in death. That cruelty almost made Lyra laugh. Instead she touched her mother's still hand and whispered, "You were wrong in ways that hurt me. You were right in ways that cost you everything. I don't know what to call that yet." Grief moved through the room quietly. No spectacle, no collapse. Just a daughter standing over the woman who had loved her with lies and died with truth. Kyle's hand settled at the back of Lyra's neck. Not claiming, holding. She leaned into it for one heartbeat, then straightened. "When we return," she said, voice rough but steady, "she is buried beside the sea." "Not in the palace," Kyle answered at once. Done. The ease of it nearly hurt. This too was becoming its own danger, having someone answer her will as if it mattered without argument. The Queen stood in the doorway, pale from the night's cost, stripped of every illusion except dignity. Elaris remained below under guard and ward until judgment could be decided. Blackwater Abbey had become less prison than evidence now. Every stone full of history the kingdom had been denied. Lyra turned to face the woman who had birthed her into secrecy and nearly lost 2 children to the same bloodline. The Queen looked at the fresh mark on Lyra's throat, then at Kyle, and whatever she saw there broke something old in her expression. "You anchored it," she said softly. "We did," Kyle answered. The correction mattered. The Queen nodded once, accepting it. Then she looked at Lyra. "I know apology has become cheap in your ears. That depends on what it costs the speaker." Pain and something almost like pride flickered across the Queen's face. "Fair." Lyra crossed the room until only a few feet separated them. Up close, the resemblance was unavoidable. The same mouth when angry, the same eyes when holding back too much. It made the loss feel more intimate and more infuriating. "You hid me," Lyra said. "You buried records. You built lies so deep an entire kingdom fed on them. You left your son to think you were dead, and your daughter to think she had never been wanted." Her pulse stayed strangely even as she said it, perhaps because the night had burned away the luxury of trembling. "So here is what happens now. You tell the truth in public, all of it that can be told without putting knives in innocent hands. You do not ask me to soften your absence, and you do not decide for me again." The Queen listened without interruption. When Lyra finished, the older woman bowed her head. Not deeply, not theatrically, just enough to show that a balance had shifted, and she knew it. Yes, she said. The answer should have satisfied. It didn't, not fully, but it was something. Sometimes after ruin, something had to be enough for the hour. Kyle's voice cut through the silence. The council will not survive this truth politely. Then let them choke on it with manners, the Queen said. For the first time, the corner of Lyra's mouth almost moved. Kyle noticed. Of course he noticed. The bond brushed warm against her ribs in quiet approval, and the intimacy of that private exchange nearly undid her more than the grief. The ride back to the capital took 2 days. By the time they reached the palace, the city had already turned itself into rumour and expectation. The lower wards had heard the king returned claimed. The noble quarter had heard the dead queen rode with him. Half the kingdom waited to see whether blood would restore the throne or shatter it. The council chamber was packed before midday. Lords, commanders, old pack heads, lesser nobles desperate not to be forgotten by history. Celine stood at one side like a woman who had spent her life preparing for other people's worst moments, and was enjoying this one more than she would admit. When Lyra entered beside Kyle, the room felt the claim mark before it fully saw it. Silence broke over the chamber like a wave. The Queen followed behind them. Several councillors went white. Lord Baron sat down so abruptly he nearly missed the chair. Good, Lyra thought. Let them feel what graves do when they stop obeying. Kyle did not take the throne immediately. That alone unsettled the room. Instead, he stood at the foot of the dais with Lyra at his side, close enough for everyone to understand she had not merely been brought into court. She had been placed where she belonged. The Queen spoke first. She did not spare herself. She told the truth in hard, clean lines, enough of it to redraw the kingdom without handing every hidden right to fools. She admitted the hidden daughter, the broken old bond, a prison at Blackwater, the Eastern Regent's conspiracy, the fact that the airline had survived where the kingdom had been taught it died. When murmurs began, Kyle ended them with a look. Then Lyra stepped forward. The hall stilled again. She felt hundreds of eyes on her, weighing blood, beauty, danger, legitimacy, the mark on her throat. The fact that the Alpha King stood close enough to kill anyone who forgot himself while looking at her. She understood in that moment how easily fear could become another prison if she let other people narrate her. So she did not let them. "I was raised in your lower city," she said, her voice carrying cleanly through the chamber. "I scrubbed your floors. I heard your wives laugh through doors they never thought I would enter. I watched noble cruelty dressed as order and poor hunger called discipline." She let the silence sharpen. "Now some of you want to know whether I am princess enough to matter here." No one moved. Lyra lifted her chin. "I am not asking your permission to matter." That hit. She saw it in Baron's face, in the commanders leaning forward, in the old packheads exchanging wary looks. "I carry Queen's blood," she continued, "but I also carry the memory of the city you burn first when politics fails. If I stand in this hall, I stand for both. And if any of you believe I can be quietly married off, politely buried, or carefully used as a softer tool for the throne, learn from the dead and correct yourselves quickly." Celine actually smiled. Kyle did not, but pride rolled through the bond so fierce and private it nearly made Lyra's knees weaken. Then Lord Baron stood anyway, because some men were born unable to read warnings until the blade entered. "Even if we accept your blood," he said tightly, "the matter of the claiming remains. The kingdom cannot simply tolerate a queen appearing from the slums and binding the Alpha King without formal rite, council witness, and—" Kyle's voice cut through him like steel. "She does not require your tolerance," Baron swallowed. The king climbed the dais then, and finally turned to face the chamber in full. Power changed the room at once. Not because of the throne behind him, because of him. "The rite has been completed," he said. "The claim stands." His gaze moved once over the gathered council, and men who had spent years wielding fear as governance lowered their eyes like chastened boys. "But for those of you too stupid to understand permanence unless it is announced formally, I will make it simple." He turned toward Lyra. The hall forgot how to breathe. He held out his hand. Not as command, as invitation. Lyra looked at it for only a moment before placing hers in his. He drew her to stand beside him on the dais, then faced the room again with her hand in his and his other hand resting close enough to the small of her back to remind every wolf alive what this distance meant. "This is Lyra of House Lunarith," he said, voice carrying like law carved into iron. "Daughter of the Moon Queen, heir of the hidden line, my chosen, my claimed, and from this day forward your queen." The silence that followed felt holy. Then, one by one, the chamber bowed. Not all gracefully, not all gladly, but they bowed. Lyra looked over bent heads and understood that power did not always arrive like triumph. Sometimes it arrived as the moment you realized the world had stopped asking whether you should exist inside it and started adjusting to the fact that you did. Kyle leaned close enough for only her to hear. "Are you still angry I called you my queen in the chamber?" The question was so absurdly timed, she nearly laughed in front of the entire court. "Deeply," she murmured. His thumb brushed once over her knuckles. "Good, I prefer you difficult." The bond warmed. The court could wait, history could wait. Even justice, for one breath, could wait. Because in the middle of the hall where she had once been invisible, Lyra stood claimed but not caged, chosen but not silenced, dangerous enough to change the kingdom, and loved enough to survive it. And that should have been the end. It would have been. If the first scream had not ripped through the palace at sunset. Chapter 14. The scream came from the lower western nursery. Lyra and Kyle were already running before the second one hit. The palace shifted instantly around them, guards surging, servants scattering, commanders shouting from intersecting halls. The lower western wing had once housed noble guest children during midwinter treaties. Now it served as an overflow shelter for women and infants displaced by the fires in the city. By the time Lyra reached the corridor, the air already smelled wrong. Milk, smoke, blood. Her heart seized. A nurse stumbled from the nursery door with red on her apron and terror in her eyes. Inside, Kyle shoved the door open. The room beyond looked as if a nightmare had mistaken cradles for a battlefield. No children were dead, not yet, but every candle had gone blue. The ward lines around the windows were blistering black. One wall had been carved open in long, deep furrows. At the center of the room stood Elaris. No chains, no guards. Her white dress was soaked at the hem. Her hair hung wild around her face. In her arms she held a wailing infant, not hurting the child, not yet, but clutching him with the rigid desperation of someone standing at the edge of some inner cliff. Everyone froze. Lyra's blood ran cold. "How did she get out?" Kyle demanded. No one answered. Elaris looked up slowly, eyes glass-bright and wrecked with something so close to despair it made the scene worse, not better. "The chains broke when your claim sealed," she said. "Didn't anyone tell you? Old bonds awaken old prisons." Kyle stepped forward. "Put the child down." Elaris laughed softly. "You say that as if I came here to kill him." Lyra looked closer and saw the truth. Elaris was shaking, not with rage. With hunger she was trying not to obey. The infant's scent, new life, new bond, new possibility, for a woman who had lost her own future to a shattered mate line and decades underground. This room must have been agony. The baby cried harder. Elaris flinched. Kyle's entire body tightened. "Do not move closer," Lyra said quietly. His gaze cut to her. "She's holding a child, and she hasn't harmed him. Yet." Elaris smiled without joy. "There is the king I expected." Lyra took one slow step into the room. Kyle caught her wrist instantly. The touch hit like flame through silk now, so familiar already, so dangerous in its ease. "Lyra," she looked at him, not at the king, at the man beneath him, the one who would rip the room apart before he let harm touch her, the one who still did not understand that not every battle could be won by stepping in front of the blade. "I know," she said softly. His grip tightened once, then loosened. She moved farther in. Every eye in the room tracked her. Kyle's wolves, the nurses trembling in the corridor, Elaris herself, who looked both starved and horrified by her own need. "You don't want to hurt him," Lyra said. Elaris's face twisted. Want has very little to do with old blood once it starts crying. The raw honesty in that answer struck hard. Then let me help. Elaris laughed again, and this time the sound broke on the way out. You think because you survived one rite you understand this hunger? No, Lyra said. I think because I nearly lost myself to the beginning of it. I know what it costs to keep saying no. That landed. The infant cried against Elaris's chest. She flinched again, hands tightening in blind reflex before she visibly forced them to ease. Kyle was one breath from moving. Lyra could feel it through the bond. Pure predatory readiness, every muscle waiting for the child's first sign of pain. She took another step, then another, until she stood close enough to see the tears Elaris had not noticed on her own face. You loved him, Lyra said. Elaris's mouth trembled. That's the sickness of it, isn't it? Lyra continued gently. You loved someone until grief stripped the shape from love and left only the hunger behind. The room had gone very still. Elaris stared at her, as if no one had ever spoken to the wound instead of the monster around it. My son would have been this size, she whispered. The sentence tore through the chamber. Lyra's own breath caught. You lost a child. Elaris let out a sound, half laugh, half collapse. I lost everything, the baby cried again. Elaris closed her eyes with the look of someone standing against a tide. Then slowly, trembling all the way through, she held the infant out. Lyra reached for him. For one terrible second, Kyle's control shattered enough to slam through the room like a storm. Every candle bent toward the floor. The wolves recoiled. The mark at Lyra's throat burned hot in answer. He saw her reaching into danger, and every instinct in him surged violent and absolute. Elaris saw it too. Her ruined smile flickered once. There, she whispered to Lyra. That is what it means to be loved by one of them. Then she let go. Lyra took the infant and stepped back. The room exhaled. Kyle crossed the distance at once, one hand at Lyra's back, the other checking the child with startling gentleness for a man who looked one heartbeat away from murder. The baby was unhurt, only terrified. Elaris stood with empty arms and a strange peace settling over her face. No one moved to chain her, no one needed to. She looked at the child once more, then at Lyra. You did what your mother could not, she said. Lyra's pulse slowed painfully. What do you mean? Elaris's gaze shifted to Kyle and back, and for the first time, no madness lived in it, only tired truth. You chose before grief chose for you. The words struck deep. Then Elaris turned toward the open nursery window where sea wind blew in from the western cliffs. Kyle's voice snapped hard enough to cut. Stop, she smiled faintly. No more cages, she said. And before anyone could reach her, Elaris stepped backward through the broken ward line and disappeared into the dark. The nurses screamed. Kyle lunged to the window too late. Far below, the sea kept hitting the cliffs with the same merciless rhythm it had always known. There was no body, only black water. Lyra stood frozen with the infant in her arms and felt the whole room trembling around a silence too large to hold. Kyle turned back to her. His face looked carved from fury and fear and the aftershock of almost. He came straight to her, took the baby gently from her hands, passed him to the nearest sobbing nurse, and then caught Lyra by the waist and dragged her flush against him. The contact was brutal in its relief. Do you have any idea, he said, voice shaking under the iron, what it does to me when you step toward things that can take you? Lyra's pulse leapt. Kyle, no. His hands tightened once, not hurting, only refusing distance. I let you move because I trust you. I let you move because I will not cage you. But do not mistake that for peace inside me. The rawness in him nearly undid her right there in the ruined nursery. She touched his face. His eyes closed for one brief second under her hand. When he opened them again, the fury had not gone. It had simply been outmatched by something deeper, more devastating. I don't survive losing you, he said. The words entered her body like a vow branded under the skin. Around them, nurses cried. Guards rebuilt the ward line, commanders shouted. The kingdom kept moving. But in that narrow, torn room, Lyra understood with bone-deep certainty that the bond was no longer the thing making him dangerous. Love was. Epilogue. 3 months later, the kingdom learned how to kneel without pretending it had chosen the lesson. Spring broke over Nightfang in silver rain and thawing cliffs. The lower city storehouses had been rebuilt stronger than before, this time with crown guards sworn to the wardens chosen from the people who actually used them. Lord Baron had been stripped of half his lands, and all his dignity after evidence tied him quietly to the Eastern Regent's money routes. Celine had enjoyed that day so much she almost smiled in public. The dead queen sat in judgment beside her son and her daughter now, not restored to innocence, never that, but restored to history. Sometimes that had to be enough. Mira Vale was buried above the sea. Lyra visited often. She had not yet found forgiveness clean enough to lay at that grave, but she had found honesty, and that was closer to love than most lies ever. The claim mark at her throat had faded from raw crimson to a pale silver crescent edged by the king's bite. It was beautiful in a way that still startled her, not because it made her owned, because it reminded her of the night she had chosen rather than been chosen for. Her chambers were no longer across from Kael's. They were his. The court had nearly choked on that too. Good. Tonight, moonlight spilled across black marble floors and silver-draped walls in the royal wing. The same forbidden wing she had once entered soaked in fear, and someone else's bathwater had become hers by law, by choice, and by the quiet, dangerous intimacy of waking in it, beside the man who had once found her there, and nearly changed the world by touching her. Lyra stood at the open balcony doors in a dark silk gown, while the sea wind lifted the ends of her hair. Below, the palace glowed gold. Beyond it, the city stretched alive and stubborn, and lit with ordinary lamps, the kind that mattered more than crowns because they meant people were home and feeding children and surviving another night. Arms came around her waist from behind. She did not startle any more. Kael's mouth brushed the mark at her throat. The contact sent a warm pulse through the bond, low and immediate. Even now, months after the rite, he could still undo her with one careful touch, especially when he was gentle. Especially when the gentleness came from a man the kingdom feared for all the right reasons. "You left dinner early," he murmured. The council was discussing grain ledgers as if famine can be intimidated by boring minutes. A low laugh vibrated against her skin. "It usually can." She leaned back into him. "Your standards for political triumph are embarrassingly low. My standards rose when I mated you." Heat flickered low in her body. She turned in his arms and found him watching her with that same impossible intensity he had carried since the chamber, only calmer now, more rooted. The bond had not softened him, it had clarified him. The kingdom saw a king. Lyra saw the male beneath the crown and understood why both were dangerous. "You say things like that as if you want me peaceful," she said. His hand moved to the small of her back. "I have never wanted you peaceful." The answer should not have made her smile. It did. Moonlight silvered the scar through his brow. The old arrow wound along his shoulder had healed cleanly. His hands were still the same, capable of violence, capable of impossible care. She remembered them bloody on the altar, steady on her face, trembling once after he bit her because the reality of having been trusted had shaken him harder than any battlefield. She touched his cheek. The bond warmed at once. Behind the warmth lay deeper things now. Not just hunger, not just possession. Memory. Shared grief. Shared victories. The quiet, everyday dependence no epic tale warned girls about, because it sounded too small to be dangerous. Yet it was. It was always dangerous to have one person become the place your body expected rest. Kael read something in her face and his gaze darkened. "What is it?" Lyra smiled faintly. "I was thinking about the first night, in my chamber, in your bath." One dark brow lifted. She softened. "I thought you were the worst thing that could happen to me." He considered that. "Reasonable." She laughed. The sound pleased him more than it should have. She saw it in the way his thumb moved once at her waist, almost unconsciously, as if joy in her had become something he watched for without admitting how often. "You were wrong then," he said. "About what?" "I was not the worst thing." Lyra's smile faded slowly into something more vulnerable, more true. "No," she said. "You were the first thing that ever felt like mine as much as I was yours." That hit him hard. She felt it through the bond before she fully saw it in his face. The deep burn of emotion he still handled like a weapon he respected too much to wave carelessly. Men like Kael did not often get spoken to with tenderness. They got obedience, fear, strategy, need, rarely this. He lowered his forehead to hers. "You make ruling difficult," he murmured. "How tragic for the realm. You also make leaving this balcony impossible. That sounds like a personal weakness." A low, dangerous smile finally touched his mouth. "That one belongs to you." The air between them changed, not abruptly, not with the frantic hunger of the tide-locked bond. Something slower now, more devastating for the choice in it. His hand rose to the side of her throat, thumb brushing the claim mark with reverence disguised badly as possession. Her breath caught. He noticed. Of course he noticed. "Still?" he asked quietly. "Yes." The single word came out softer than she intended. His eyes burned. Months later, and he still paused, still waited, still let desire ask instead of take. That pause undid her every time. Lyra slid one hand into his hair and kissed him first. The answer in him was immediate. Not rough, not yet, just deep and sure and helpless in the way only controlled men ever became helpless. By degrees, with terrifying intent. He kissed her as though the world had narrowed again, only this time there was no fear inside the narrowing, no blood altar, no crypt, no question over whether reaching would destroy. Only choice. His hand tightened at her waist when she moved closer. Her body arched into his before pride could intervene. The bond opened warm and hungry, no longer a blade but still fire enough to remind her what they were capable of becoming together. When he drew back, it was barely an inch. "If you keep looking at me like that," he said, voice rough, "I will carry you inside and ignore every courtesy your ladies tried to teach me." Lyra's pulse jumped. "My ladies are deeply overrated." His mouth brushed hers again. "Good," she should have answered with something sharper. Instead she whispered, "Kael." The way his name changed in her mouth still wrecked him. She loved that. Quietly, fiercely, with the sort of satisfaction only women who had survived too much ever got to claim. He lifted her into his arms. Lyra gave a startled laugh and caught at his shoulders. "Your Majesty, too late to become formal now." The king carried her through the open balcony doors into the chamber that had once been forbidden and now belonged to both of them. Moonlight followed across the floor. So did history. So did blood and grief, and all the dangerous choices that had shaped them into something the kingdom could no longer break without first breaking itself. At the threshold to the bedchamber, Kyle paused and looked at her the way he had looked at her in the crypt after the altar accepted them, like a man holding something sacred and savage all at once. "My queen," he said quietly. This time she smiled without fear. Then she touched the claim mark at her throat, looked into the eyes of the man who had found her in his forbidden chamber and never truly let her go, and answered with the truth that had finally become simple. "Yes," she said, "I belong to you." His eyes flashed gold, and somewhere beyond the palace walls the kingdom kept breathing under the rule of a queen born in hiding, a king dangerous enough to deserve her, and a bond strong enough to survive being chosen cleanly at last.